Please welcome Liz Khoo, Lead Product Designer at Salesforce.
Hey everyone. First of all, I want to thank you all for sharing your time and your attention with me here today. And I also want to thank Webflow for bringing me out. It is truly an honor and very humbling to be here with such an excellent lineup of speakers. So they introduced me, but I like to reintroduce myself. Hi, I am Liz, and I am a product designer, and I work at Salesforce. And I'm here to talk about designing no-code tools. So I spent the past 3 years at Salesforce designing no-code tools with a team of very smart, very talented people. But before I get too far ahead, I have a really fun thing to show you, which is this forward-looking statement. And I know what you're thinking. Yes, I do have to show this to you. The gist of it is Salesforce is a publicly traded company. Please do not buy our stock based on anything that I talk about today. All right, I know. It really engenders a lot of trust in me, right? OK, so back to designing no-code tools. When I think about this problem, there is a blog post by Webflow's own CEO, Vlad Magdalin, that stood out to me. It really resonated with me. He wrote about when they were first pitching Webflow to investors, that most investors would tell us that Webflow was either too hard to use for non-technical people or not powerful enough for professional use cases. And he's describing a user experience problem, right? And this is pretty universal to all no-code tools. We, as the builders, the designers of no-code platforms, are trying to balance simplicity, the no-code experience, with capability, flexibility, the full power of code. And Salesforce has a pretty extensive clicks, not code platform. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Salesforce, it is a customer relationship management solution provider. So that means people use our product to build things that serve their sales, customer service, marketing, e-commerce, all of those business functions. And we've done pretty well. We have a really big tower just down the street. And we just raised our annual revenue guidance to over $16 billion. So clicks, not code has real value. And by clicks, what I mean is things that look like this. Right? As you can tell from this UI, Salesforce is 20 years old. We've been around for a while. But we've evolved. We've grown as a product organization, as a design organization. And we now have the Salesforce Lightning Design System. And that system is a foundation that allows us internally and our customers to build things that look like this: rich, modern, responsive applications for enterprise and for consumers. Right? Our customers are using the Lightning Design System to build things for their customers. So how does one go about building the platform that enables this? Right? What does the clicks-based experience look like behind this? Like any good customer-focused company, it starts with who are our users. And for a very long time, the two main users of the Salesforce platform fell into these buckets. They were our admins, the people using the clicks, and our developers, the people using Visualforce and Apex, which are our proprietary framework and programming language. But it had been a long time since we'd really examined these two personas. And so over the past year, the Salesforce user research team undertook a rather massive effort to re-examine them. They sent out a survey to hundreds of thousands of our users across all of our products. And what they heard back was that of the people who are using our platform, 40% said that they code. But only about 30% identified themselves as developers. So what this means is we have a segment of users who code, but are not coders. What they also found is that of the people who use code, 90% said that they also use click-based tools. So a major conclusion from this research was that it's not just code versus no code anymore. That description, that dichotomy, doesn't fully encompass our user base. It's not an accurate reflection of how our users self-identify as professionals. What is their skill set? How they go about getting their jobs to be done. So our user pool is not just this, clicks and code. It's also sort of this. It's a gradient type experience. And this new persona group that they identified, they called builders. And they defined them as the people who customize and enhance Salesforce using no-code tools. So you might think, that's obvious. But this is really the first time that we had data to back the existence of this persona group. And data is important. Facts are important. So what does this mean for our product? How are we evolving our no-code tools based on this information? I'm going to be talking to you specifically about just some of our no-code tools, the ones that I'm most familiar with. Within our Salesforce app development stack, we have different no-code tools that do user interface design, ones that help you write business logic, and then also ones that create the data model. And so I'm going to be talking to you about two tools that are within this business logic layer. And those two tools are Process Builder, which creates processes, and Flow Builder, which creates flows. There's a little redundancy there, so I'll get to that in a second. And by business logic, what I mean is you can write a program with these tools without writing code. So if the mindset of our builders, our builder persona, looks like this, and if I were to map conceptually the features of those two tools against this, it would sort of look like this, two separate circles. Actually, it's kind of worse than that. It looks like this, a Venn diagram, which means that there are areas of overlapping functionality and areas of unique functionality to each tool. And then what's that empty space on the side? There are still some things that could only be done in code. You can't do them in the no-code tools. So this poses a few different problems, right? For one, if you're new to our platform, you have to learn not just one tool, you need to learn two. You also need to know what is the scope of your project that you're working on. Because if you create something in Process Builder, there isn't an easy, elegant way to transfer it into Flow Builder and get that extended functionality. What we need is for our tools, that landscape, to reflect the mindset of the builders. We need them to look more like this, these concentric circles radiating out from a starting point. We need to give our builders a path to progress along. And that brings us to this idea of progressive enhancement. So progressive enhancement has been around since 2003. It was originally conceived of as a principle for web design. I like the way that it's described here in this 2009 Smashing Magazine article by Sam Dwyer. He wrote, progressive enhancement is the principle of starting with a rock-solid foundation and then adding enhancements to it if you know certain visiting user agents can handle the improved experience. So when he says user agents, he's talking about the client browser, right? Under progressive enhancement, the website will just deliver the amount of code and user experience that the client browser can handle. But when I read this, I thought, oh, you know, user agents, those could be our builders. Those could be our builder personas, persona users. So I'm suggesting that progressive enhancement can be applied as a principle for no-code tools using different tactics. And those tactics fall under a few different themes. Creating stepping stones, setting smart defaults, and automating with transparency, transparent automation. All right, so what are each of these things? Stepping stones. Guide users through their learning journey, providing the next step at the right time. This is truly embarrassing to show you, but for a very long time, this was the first thing that you saw when you opened up our Flow Builder tool. Just a giant white empty canvas, right? It's pretty intimidating. What do I do? It certainly contributed to the reputation that the tool has for having a really steep learning curve. By contrast, Process Builder, which was designed for a more novice user in mind, has this as its empty state, as its blank state. Right away, the user is being introduced to the basic structure of a program. There's a prompt to add a trigger, add some conditions, and also add some actions, right? And Process Builder is really well adopted. Every month, there are more than 100,000 customer orgs using it, and there are literally hundreds of billions of processes that run every month that were built with this. So in the future, Flow Builder might have an empty state that looks more like this, right? Mimicking what we learned works well in Process Builder. So that's a basic template. How do you meet other use cases? We've also recently launched Flow Solutions, which is a new storefront on the Salesforce App Exchange. So through here, we're developing relationships with partners, third parties, who can create solutions and templates and components that serve more specific industries and use cases. Another thing we're doing to address this blank state problem, is we're looking at moving away from drag and drop as our main form of Canvas interaction. We're looking at adding a menu-based form of addition. And we call it Click to Create. And we are adopting this from another no-code tool at Salesforce called Pardot. Pardot does B2B email marketing campaigns. And there are a few benefits to this, right? For one, it limits the number of errors that can be caused if someone tries to add something that's illogical through drag and drop. Number two, it's also entirely navigable by keyboard. So that's a +1 for accessibility. And the accessibility of our products is really, really important to us at Salesforce. And I hope it is for you as well. And then the last thing we're doing here to provide stepping stones to our users is we're looking at exploring the addition of what we call guardrails. So they are timely, helpful tips that feed users a little bit more information as they continue in their learning journey in product. And this is something that's being pioneered by yet another one of our no-code tools called Lightning App Builder. All right, the next theme is smart defaults, right? And this is based in the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. And the idea here is that you can prioritize the 20% of your features that meet the 80% of use cases to create a smart default. Right? We're trying to create this type of experience for our builders, which means that we need to take things that are really complex pro-code concepts and translate them into a click-based experience that people can understand. And an example of this at Salesforce is trigger types. So trigger types is a pro-code concept in Apex, our proprietary language. And it controls the order of execution. So there are two types. There's a before trigger type, which means that the action will run before the database save. And then there's the after trigger type, which means the action runs after the database save. And this feature did not exist in Flow Builder. Half of it sort of existed in Process Builder. Right? And this was a blocking feature. Some people could not use our no-code tools because it didn't have this. So of course we're adding it in, but how do we introduce it, right? So by looking at customer usage data around trigger types and by listening to customer feedback, we were able to determine what the 80% use case is. And most of the time, what people wanted to have happen is that they wanted an automatic update to occur within a record. Right? If they updated one field, they would like to have automatically updates appear in another part of the field before the database save. And this use case could be served by roughly 20% of our tool's features. So in the tool, what that means is when someone selects the option to start this flow, trigger this flow, when a record is saved, behind the scenes, we apply that before trigger type. So the user doesn't have to stop and learn what is a trigger type and make a choice between those two things. It also means that on the canvas, we can give them a more specific version of that default template, where we replace generic actions with this update record callout. And we can also limit their tool palette to just the elements that we know will work with this kind of logic. And so what about that after trigger type, right? We're now hiding this underneath advanced options. Because it's a less common use case, we feel pretty confident that we can put it under here. And if somebody chooses to use this, there's more room for them to make errors in their logic, but we also feel that they are probably advanced enough to know what they're doing. All right. And the last theme is around transparent automation, which means to automate the complex stuff, but give users a way to inspect and override defaults. An example of that we have in Flow Builder is variables. Again, a very pro-code concept. And you need them all the time, right? So for example, in a program, a thing you want to do is look up some data and then do things with that data, right? So in Flow Builder, we do that with this get records element. So you give it some search criteria, and then the database returns a record that meets that search. But then to actually use that data in your business logic, you had to declare variables and then almost one-to-one map that data into the variables. And as you can see from this video, that's a rather long, tedious process. It's up to 10 clicks per variable creation, and you would need a new variable anytime you had a different data type that you wanted to bring in, or if you didn't want to override the variables that you were working with. So we are going to automate that, right? We're going to automate that variable creation. And what that means is that now, when someone uses a get records to say, look up their New York City contacts, and they want to reference that in a decision element, make a decision on that data set, those results will just appear wherever they are a valid input. So that's the automation piece. The transparent part of this automation is that we are also showing users in this toolbox all of the variables that we've automatically created for them. And they can click here and inspect and see which element on the canvas created that variable. We are still also preserving that original behavior as an advanced feature. Mostly it's important for backwards compatibility. Some of these tools, or rather this tool has been around for about 10 years. And you can't just do a mass find and replace on your users. You know, that's not a very trustworthy thing to do. You know, I went into a lot of detail there. It's the end of a long day. I hope you're still with me. You know, there's just a couple things that I can impress upon you before I leave the stage. You know, for one, we are actively working on this progressive enhancement path for our builders. I would be the first person to say we still have a long way to go. And if you're working on something similar, I'd love to hear from you. You know, come talk to me afterwards. And so if you are out there designing a no-code tool, a no-code platform as well, I hope you're asking yourselves, what are your users saying that can help you to find your stepping stones, create smart defaults, and also automate with transparency. Thank you.